What's good, everybody? It's your girl, Miss Giselle, and this is the Black Table Conversations with Miss Giselle. And today we have Mr. John Burgess of Cali in the building. And with all of that said, Mr. John Burgess, say hey to everybody.
How's everybody doing? Hey, y'all.
So how you been? How's everything going with you?
Well, I mean, if you heard my recent testimony, that was draining. It took a lot just in preparation. I knew that the testimony that I was going to give the California Reparations Taskforce could only be 10 minutes, and it was a very emotional testimony for me to give that. But I feel relieved now that that's done. But this is just the beginning of a long. I'm not even going to say fight because it's not a fight. You know, the fight's already been won, and our ancestors did that for us. So, yeah. But it will be a process of educating and carving out and making sure that the things are done in a fashion that are equitable for once in California, with the hopes that we move on throughout some other states and other states are watching.
Well, I love the fact that you jump right into that. So this is what we're gonna do. I want you to tell people. Let's talk about you. Let's talk about you, your brother, and your brand that you guys are building. Tell a little bit about your history, and then we're gonna get to what we're working on right now.
Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, so I am public servant by trade. You know, done that for 26 years, but I've always had an entrepreneurial spirit, and I know why. It's in my DNA. It goes back to our great-great-grandfather. But my brother and I started a company about 10 years ago, 12 years ago now, Burgess Brothers, and it was a restaurant. We went from a restaurant, because it takes a lot of work to do a restaurant, to packaging our food products. And from there to appliances. And so now really what we do is we service, ballparks, arenas, universities, and colleges with some of the best cornbread mix in the world. The only one that you can do a cornbread waffle with. You won't want. I mean, please don't go and insult grandma or your mom. We all got grandmas, but once you have this mix, once you have the mix, grandma grandma approve it. I'm telling you that right now.
Well, that's amazing. I love that. You're supposed to rep your brand that way.
Yeah.
Can you hear echo on your side at all?
I don't. Do you hear echo?
I kind of did, but it's okay. It's all right. Just wanted to check. Now, with that said, I love that. I might have to get my daughter, who's starting her own little. She has a little brand dealing with food, so I might have her make some of your cornbread on her little podcast or like her little show online. So that's dope.
Yes,
I love it. So now that's your history. I love it. That's amazing. And now, what's going on right now in Cali? To those who are not watching, I've been posting about it, but to those who aren't really paying attention, tell them like.
Yeah. So for those that are not paying attention, right now California is actually doing what California should be doing, and that's leading the way. We're the 5th largest economy in the world, so we should do some extraordinary things. With that being said, California is heading up the reparations task force, the study of reparations. And part of that study is identifying and sharing stories like mine of what happened to descendants of slaves and their families, and what continues to happen, and what's still happening today, and how do we quantify that and then right size it. I don't know if we'll ever rid the world of racism, unfortunately. It's something that's deep down hated and taught, and children don't grow up to be racist. They're taught to be racist.
Right.
So I think we can hopefully rid the world, but part of this reparations task force is, we're diving into the study. And my family came to California. My great-great-grandfather, actually, this man here, if you can see him.
Okay.
You see the resemblance?
Yes.
So he came to California in 1849 before it was part of the Union, and actually during the early days of the gold rush. And so He could read and write. His name's Rufus Burgess. He left us autobiography. That sparked my testimony with the task force. So I'm honored to have been able to speak on behalf of not just my great grandfather, but all the other pioneer great grandfathers and great grandfathers that actually came and were a part of California's history that nobody knows about today.
Well, that's amazing. Now, with your grandfather when he came to Cali, um, you want to tell a little bit about that, like your grandfather's history?
Sure. He wrote extremely well in his autobiography. He was actually born in Mecklenburg, Virginia, told that his parents died in his infancy. You can look at him, more than likely he was a son of the slave owner. And he said he learned how to read and write in the house of his master and was always, a part of the church. He talked about a couple of wives and marriages and families, those persons being sold on the chopping blocks to Kentucky and Washington. He eventually was brought out to California during the gold rush after his last slave owner died and held for unpaid debt. Unfortunately, California was not a free state. A lot of people believe that it was, but believe it or not, it wasn't. He was actually sold here in California. Now, they didn't sell on the blocks and they didn't do it, but there are some parts, especially during the gold rush, where those slave owners brought over their slaves. And the first governor of California, Peter Burnett, actually, there was legislation that you could come here with your slaves as long as California was not going to be your primary residence for an extended period of time. So a lot of the early pioneer gold rushers brought their slaves with them. And there are certain cases where, they, because California was not part of the Union, some of those people were actually, after they were set free or paid for their freedom, imprisoned and shipped back to the South. And so these are the things that happened in California, and it affected, as well as, we talk about redlining and, Jim Crow laws and all those, but these codes existed. And so what I shared with the task force was that my family was here in 1849. There was a reconstruction before this 1900 era. It was an 1870 reconstruction that occurred after the Civil War. So those pioneer blacks that were in California, they were left out of things and had been here for 20 years building. And, it rings true to what Dr. King said about how immigrants were coming here from other countries, getting land by the, hundreds of acres.
Right.
And you had individuals like my great grandfather, my great grandfather that had been here that established and didn't get anything. Now, we were fortunate, members of the Masonic order, both of my great and great. And so there was a mutual respect for men. So we have deeds today that reside in the family that go back to 1872, of which I was told that, those records burned. Well, they really didn't. The Latter-day Saints have done a really good job keeping a lot of records.
Right.
And so, there's some searches that they do, but I found a lot in my own history and my own research, studying this history that's been left out of history. It's like, how could you leave such a prominent family out of the gold rush era when we were here? And literally, my great grandfather, he's writing in the newspaper about kids being turned away from school in 1870. He was a secretary of the church that was established by our family up where gold was discovered. There were communities, and so these things are harmful because they hurt. It's never been said, never been talked about. And I would say this, it's just as hurtful for our European brothers and sisters whose ancestors have been raised on a pedestal and made to be something that they truly weren't. And when they find out that, their ancestors did what they did, that's trauma as well. And so, like I said in my testimony, I don't blame people, I blame the institution. The institution that basically made Black people or descendants of slaves to be second class in America. And so that's what we're trying to peel those back and dismantle that in California. And I think with testimonies like mine and others coming forth, as long as I'm a part of it, I intend to do as much as I can to dismantle the unfortunate racism that is taught and still exists today from a lot of people just truly not knowing their history, but I'm going to say our history, and let's make it, I hope that we can make California great just one time, right? By telling true history. And there's a way that we can do it without making those descendants of European families and immigrants feel a certain way because of what their ancestors did, but at the same time, us not feeling a certain way because of what our ancestors went through.
I love that. And you're absolutely right. And like you said, make it a second class then, but now it's making us a permanent bottom class. So when we come back from our little break, what we're going to talk about is the prediction of us being at zero wealth by 2053 and why the push in California is so significant and how we can, adjust the future, the next level for the other states. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. And we're back. And Mr. John, we're going to pick up where we left off at. Now, let's dive into like what the legislature, everything that you guys are trying to put in place right now. Like we discussed before the commercial, you're trying to get things right and pretty much set this home. But let others know what is happening in California is going to change the game for all other states or create the blueprint for it, rather.
Well, I mean, really, California is the first state, and I commend our governor for, really being proactive in such an important issue, but we'll be the first state to actually do a study and then make legislation, pass legislation for reparations. And so it's very important that we get it right because right now everybody is looking at California. And as I said earlier, California is, if I didn't say it, but I'm going to repeat it, it's the 5th largest economy of the world. And, it's very important that we get it right because it will be the blueprint for other states and potentially even our federal government. The reparations, every state had their involvement, but the feds had their involvement too. And so we're aiming, at least I'm aiming, and I think even when I hear the members of the task force, to get this right because all eyes are on us. And if we truly want to be the leading, innovative, inclusive California that people think we are, it's time to get this right and really do it because we haven't been that inclusive in California. And I made a point to mention it just when you look at our government contracting and the amount of contracts that go to descendants of slaves that are in business. And if they're not, how do we help them get in business? So I've got a lot of ideas and proposals that I believe will be put forth in addition to, yes, cash payments. You can't do reparations and some families like my family, restitution because there's proof, reparations because of what I can share in my family story and so many others can't because documents were burned or the things that were done because let's face it, we were lucky if one out of every 100 slaves could read and write. So a lot of people just have the oral narrative. And, academia, as you know, well, if it wasn't written, it didn't happen. It's just a sad story. And so that breaks my heart because I know our lineage, it's culture. We passed on. I mean, I got recipes that mom never wrote down because that was just our culture, right? And so to hear a Eurocentric way of, well, if it's not written down, it didn't happen. Well, you don't know my history then,
Right.
if you're going to say that. So we have to give some credibility. So I think these, as California's, having people testify and give their family stories is powerful for not only California, but all the other states that are watching, as well as the federal government, because this is real trauma. The things that happened to me and my family, it's trauma daily, on a daily, just knowing that there are pictures of my family that I still don't have, artifact that came out of a house somewhere, and my mother never saw them. They weren't placed in a museum and talked about. I can't think of a European family in California that this happened to. Even the indigenous tribes, at some point they got their artifact back. And
Right.
so for pictures of my family to be in a museum or with others and we don't have them, it's just disturbing. And that is trauma. But there's a whole bunch of other things, and I don't want to go on and take up all your time talking about my trauma, because this is about everybody else, but this will lead the way for everybody else.
Yes, so I definitely agree. Now, what can anyone do, like, just to, if they don't want to, like, just dive right into the fight right away, because everyone's like, what is this? Because we're just waking up so many across the country. But what can they do? Where can they start? What would you suggest?
Well, I mean, really, we've got another, I want to say before the end of the year, there were 3 meetings, I think, already. So at least another 4 or 5 meetings, I believe.
Right.
Tune in. I'll share the media link. I can't think of it right now, but they've recorded every task force meeting. So really what I would encourage people to do is get educated. Because if you don't know, the worst thing is to not have the education, right? So tune into some of these meetings, because there are some really powerful speakers, educated individuals that are on the task force, as well as people that are coming to testify, and begin there. So I know you can go to California Department of Justice Reparations Task Force, Google it. A link will come up. All the meetings, I believe, have been recorded there as well.
Yeah, they're on. It's on Emend. Hold on, I'm gonna pull it back up. It's on the Emend, EMEND, the Mass Media Group on YouTube. So if you want to catch up to find out what's really going on, some of the videos are pretty long because it's a lot of information, and they're literally going through each section to break this down on a more micro level. So I love the fact that they're doing that. And the majority of the task force that I saw, they look Black American. Are they Black American? I saw.
Yes. So speaking of the task force, the majority of the task force is Black American, and there is one Japanese American, and yeah, I actually initially kind of questioned that. I'm like, well, how come there are no European people on the task force?
Right.
And
because we weren't in when they were breaking, doing that for the other community. Like,
well, I question. So for somebody that's watching or looking at it, they may come off, and I think to some degree, I have my thoughts, because I don't know if a European person on the task force could actually even relate. And sometimes I think the lack there of that being able to relate is a trigger, and it hurts, even when I tell you compassionately. So I think it's a safe place to not have Europeans on the task force. I really do. I would like to think that we can get to a place where it would be inclusive, to where they do have the understanding, but I think history has been so removed and so watered down until a lot of them don't know history, right? So it wouldn't be a place for them to be on, because at the end of the day, without the writings of my family, there's certain things, you're just not taught. Like, for example, I went up to the gold discovery site today, and I listened to the little Mormon gentleman talk about the Mormons, and I asked him, and then they told me about the Chinese, and so I asked him, I said, were there any Black people that did anything here? And he began to stutter, and he told me about one Black family, and of course didn't even know my family, didn't know me, said he had heard of the Burgesses. And so that, I just think of that park's been, they took that park in 1951. It's on the 4th grade reading level. And so that means since 1951 until 2021, all the 4th graders that go up there are getting a one-sided, not true history. So think about all these people for all this time, right? And now you grew up and you're an adult, and I want to place you in a task force. Well, if you haven't got my
You've been
story,
heavily indoctrinated with the wrong stuff.
exactly. So I come to a place where I think it's safe not to have, and hopefully we'll never have to repeat this again. That's the goal, right? We never repeat this, and so that's what reparations is for as well, is to repair.
Right. And lastly, I'm gonna ask, did you hear about the UN actually had a meeting recently about the racial injustices and slavery? I think it was slavery included. It was slavery included. I'm going to tell you exactly. It was the U.S. The U.S. and the U.K. actually skipped the meeting on race and reparations for the UN. The UN held a meeting to discuss race and reparations, and the United States and the UK both just skipped the meeting. So, like, what would you think? Like, just thinking back, or you just looking at the history now and how things are happening to us right now. What kind of message does that send to the world when you pitch the phrase that you're the land of the free and the home of the brave? Because it looks a little scared, like not to show up to the meeting.
Well, I think it's a sad place. I think it definitely doesn't send the right message to your descendant slave families, your American descendant slave families. Because, we know that really there was only one American slave that had the atrocities done on American soil for so long. And that's the African descendant of slaves in America that had that. Now, people will talk about others being enslaved or indentured service, but they didn't create Jim Crow laws. They didn't create redlining.
Right.
There are a host of things that just weren't done. So it's actually sad, and because this was stimulated, this was something that was approved at a federal level. It took a federal level to emancipate. And so for the United States government, for whatever reason, not to show up, it puts us in a sad place and says that, well, California's really got to show United States what we should be doing. Yeah. And I would encourage, and hopefully every state of their own, to come to something like this. And it's a matter of time the feds are going to do. And maybe California just will have to lead, and they see we move from the 5th largest economy to the 2nd or 3rd because of all the incredible businesses that descendants will be able to have created. We've always been creators and established communities and businesses that were just taken away. They're underneath rivers or lakes, or the pieces. Right. Yeah. So
community.
Yep.
Yep. No, you're absolutely right. And just to add to that, Muhammad Ali even admitted, he said he was in a restaurant and 2 African brothers from the motherland came in dressed in their attire. They allowed those brothers to eat in the restaurant where he was told, because of who you are not allowed to eat in this restaurant. And at that point, he said he knew there was a difference. There was and at that point, we can't really, I like the fact that we're circling our wagons, and we're focusing on our specific injustices that were done to us here, our Black Holocaust in America. On this.
Yeah. I mean, they should be specific, and while I believe they should be specific because there was one individual group that happened to. Anybody that's of Black skin and this place we call America has dealt with the Jim Crow on the rate if they were here during that time. And so again, that makes it doesn't make it more, it seems very simple to me, not complicated at all.
Right.
I think once we as a nation stop kicking the can down the road, that'll be impactful. But we as a nation have kicked the can down the road so long until now we have this massive, it's almost like if you don't fix a roof leak, and you just let it leak, right? And then
Right.
eventually
Build a
the whole
phone.
thing, you rot out the whole, right? You rot out a bunch of stuff, and now you got water pouring in everywhere. And so that's kind of what's happened with this. One didn't stop the next, and then there's something else. And we've done makeshift things that were band-aids, or to say, hey, well, let's just start right here and get over it. Well, part of reparations is reconciling. And part of reconciling is sharing the truth of what happened. And so, like, for example, I'm a believer that history is history. So in the South, which I don't live, but if we want to keep the Confederate soldiers up in the South and say that they're heroes, tell all the history.
Facts.
Tell that we let the white Union soldiers free and starve the black ones. Tell that and put it on the bottom of the plaque.
Tell them about our own little concentration
right. So
camp.
that's what But my thing is, if you're going to tell that, he probably wouldn't have been patronized, because it wouldn't be acceptable, and at some point it would have been politically irresponsible and not appropriate. So, but if we want that history, then tell all the history and erect the signs. And I say this, and I'll land my plane here.
Yeah.
We don't promote murders, rapists, and killers and put them on pedestals. We don't do that. Why? Because, and if we knew that, then we remove them. But the goal is, if we were teaching true history, we would have never done it in the first place. And so I don't blame some of the people, because a lot of people have been misled. A lot of people didn't know what I just shared about the black Union soldiers being starved and remained captured, while the white ones went free. That's a humanitarian thing. That's I'm sorry. If I knew that, yes, take the statue down.
Right.
Or if you're not going to take it down, put that history right there with it so everybody can see. And a kid will say, why are we celebrating this guy if he did those things? A child would tell you that. So I'm not a proponent of taking down and taking out history, because you can repeat it. So tell it. But I do think if we were sharing true history, a lot would just be different. It's been one-sided and Eurocentric since our ancestors, I won't even say our ancestors were brought here and made to give their free labor to really build what we all enjoy today.
Right. Well, I tell you one thing, this has been a pleasure having you here at the Black Table. And this is not the last time, because we are diving in. I can't wait. Everybody tune in, because all eyes is on Kelly right now, because nothing else matters until we get this part straight. And reparations is not just possible, it's tangible to us. This generation may be the first group of American descendants of chattel slavery, Negro freedmen, to inherit the wealth that our ancestors fought so hard for, that worked so hard for, that died for. So, and with that said, the revolution will be televised, and it's been a pleasure having you here today. Do you want to leave everybody with something?
No, I think I've said all that I need to say. I would just say this, is that we are going to make California great finally, for once, and with the goal that this will lead to all the states and the feds, and finally, just for once, make America great. Thank you. My name is John Burgess, and I'm out.
All right. And until next time, family, peace, love, and reparations.